I just also want to encourage you to just notice that this is a good day, that we're here as kinfolk. And I want to encourage you maybe just to take a breath in and feel the warmth or coolness of the air. Feel the part of your body that is resting against the seat. Feel your feet against the ground. Beneath the concrete of this building, beneath the struts of the foundation, is the good, sweet earth, the earth of transformation, of change, of composting, of generation and regeneration. In this moment, I invite us to be grateful to the earth. She did not shake us off in the night. To acknowledge, as a proverb says, earth is the mother at whose breast we suck always. And know that all that we eat, all that we take in for nourishment, comes from the earth, from those who eat the grass, for those who eat the grass eaters, for us, for the trees who give us our oxygen. And so in this moment, in this great web of interconnected life, of life that is impermanent, that is coming and going, send your breath out to the plant people. Send your gratitude to them, especially to the trees that consent to grow in the cities, that consent to still bring beauty, to the strength of the green shoot that breaks through the concrete, to the earth that abides, the earth that was for millions of years a ball of ice, a ball of fire, for the great single landmass that once abided on an ever eternal ocean. And acknowledge the change that comes whether we want it or not. And taking a breath, breathe in this moment and your being in this moment. And I invite you on this day to just let go of what is difficult, what is hard. To be in the present moment as we celebrate that which has abided for thousands and tens of thousands of years. What we bring to you comes from our ancient past, and yet it is as fresh and contemporary as today. Open your heart to someone that you care about. Open your heart to someone, some place, some group that is in the need of healing. And I invite you, out of the abundance that you have, out of the privilege that everyone in this room partakes of, to send your well wishes to some part of the world, your family, your community, this city, neighboring cities, this continent, neighboring continents, just to send your well wishes to them. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm Arisika Razak. I'm the moderator. I'll be introducing our guest. Some of our sponsors are the California Institute of Integral Studies, and in particular, the Women's Spirituality Department. Annette, would you stand? Annette is the current director of the Women's Spirituality Department, and I'd like to welcome her. We have done this, but I am supposed to say that it is due to the generous sponsorship of the California Institute of Integral Studies that this event is possible. So I want to thank you for, again, all of your well wishes, and I want to thank the tech crew that is here. I'm just going to briefly introduce Hallie Austen will be going first. She began studying ancient Greek language and mythology at the age of 12. She's a graduate of Brown University, and in her book, Women's Spirit, describes her journey driving from England to Nepal. Hallie's been leading workshops and rituals on the sacred feminine since 1974. She offers classes and consultations on dream work, life transition rituals, and wisdom healing Qigong. She's the co-founder of Seaflow, Protect Our Living Oceans, as well as All One Ocean, making Everyday Beach Cleanup Day. Vijaya Nagarajan is the chair and associate professor of the Department of Theology, Religious Studies, and she also teaches in the program of Environmental Studies at the University of San Francisco. She writes about Hinduism, gender, ritual, ecology, energy, and the commons. Recently, her work has centered around spiritual autobiographies of place, especially around immigration and motherhood. She's been active in the American Academy of Religion and environmental movement in the United States and has published widely. Both of them will have books outside after this event. I'm Arisika Razak. I'm the former chair of the Women's Studies program at CIIS. I'm a midwife, an inner city midwife of 20 years. I taught at CIIS for 20 years. I currently teach and lecture mostly at the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland. And we're all very delighted to have you here. Besides acknowledging the Ohlone, I want to acknowledge that we are in a museum dedicated to the survival of the Jewish people, and to also acknowledge the Shekinah as the sacred feminine in Judaism. And we are delighted to be here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Hallie.
Thank you, Arisika. It's really wonderful to be here. Berkeley is, to me, the birthplace of the women's spirituality movement. I remember watching the moon when I lived here for 10 years and being so excited to have moon rituals and meeting with other women who are feeling that it was important to recognize our bodies as sacred and the cycles as sacred and the earth as sacred. And so it's very interesting that both of us do environmental work as well as teach about women and the sacred. Makes total sense to me. But when I shifted from teaching workshops and writing books about women's spirituality and the goddess and started doing the current work that I do, which is cleaning up the oceans, I would think, how did I get from the goddess to trash? And then I realized it's just a different way of serving the mother. So we have all our different ways of serving the mother. One thing I want to mention is those of you who are interested or honor the Celtic calendar, this is the true Beltane today, the cross-quarter day between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. You have to kind of count back. So Beltane is one of the cross-quarter days along with Halloween, so when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. So may we call through the veil the sacred feminine to become embodied here on this planet. There's so much I want to say, and I got a little distracted by the tech part, but I'm really grateful that it's working now. I did this book, The Heart of the Goddess, because I wanted to share these images from around the world showing that women, the female body, and what we call the feminine has been honored throughout time and throughout the planet. And that was the most important part to me, is that it be completely as many cultures from around the world as I could find, and that was no small challenge. And I love them. They're just so beautiful. So when my book was out of print, it first was published in 1990, I put the images on a video and put them on the internet. So they are available on the internet. You can use them as a meditation or to share them in your classes. It's heartgoddess.net. And so why do I say the heart of the goddess? And I struggled with this word because I don't want to imply that it's something external from us that's sacred. And yet I feel we need to use the language of our culture in order to heal our culture. But ultimately, to me, what is the all that is beyond gender. But I use the word goddess because we need to bring women's energy, women's talents, women's power back forward, and we also need to bring forward what we call the feminine. And it's not really the feminine, it's human values. We think of compassion, we think of nurturing, we think of cooperation, that's feminine, but these are truly human qualities. So these images, these stories, I also included stories, the myths, meditations, DT. Anyway, so I wanted to not just show the images, I wanted to honor the cultural context of these images and find out whatever I could, which again was not that easy sometimes, and present those, and then also meditations so that people could own the images and have their own direct experience with this goddess, this ancestor, this spirit. So I really feel that we need these images. I did art because they speak directly to us. They can't be mistranslated. They can be destroyed, but they can't be mistranslated. So they can speak directly to us. So we need these qualities that are embodied, encoded in these images in order to bring this world back into balance. And studies have shown that when women and girls are empowered and given control over their lives, that there's less poverty, less violence, and it's even the primary wedge to reversing, not just stopping, but reversing climate change. So we need these on all levels. It's so important to get away from this hyper-masculine. It's not truly masculine culture we're living in. It's what some people call it the toxic masculine. It's a hyper-masculine culture that is not benefit men either. And I included the myths because myths are a form of shortened history, abbreviated history. Okay, so now we can, Arisika asked me to show the video first, and I'd like to allow you all to just take this as a meditation. Just let the images flow through you. If you want to know more about individual ones, there's a lot of information in the book. And I will then talk about a few of them and why they're relevant to our time. Beltane, the veil between the worlds is thinnest. Technology is just learning to interact with the veil between the worlds. So I call her the great goddess of Locelle. She is from France. She was painted red, and over the entrance to a cave 20,000 years ago. In her right hand, she's holding a horn, probably, with 13 marks, which are, of course, the 13 moon cycles in the sun cycle. And this reflects this, and the fact that she's showing with her other hand, her belly, the understanding of the relationship or the honoring of women's body cycles with the cycles of the heavens. And seen, because all of us have ancestors who honored the goddess or female ancestors, spirits, no matter what our racial or spiritual heritage. But looking back and seeing this honoring of the moon, which is reflected in this piece that I have here draped in front of the altar. It's a Hawaiian lunar calendar, and in traditional Hawaiian culture, which is being revived today, every phase of the moon has a different name and is recognized which phase is best for different kinds of planting or fishing or whatever. So as we reclaim this living by cycles, we learn what it means, how to live in harmony with this planet. And so she is one of the oldest that we know, and we know that from Paleolithic times for 25,000 years, almost all of the human images were female, and yet there's been another one that's been discovered. The archaeologist who discovered it says that it's a goddess, that's her determination, and that it's found in layers between 235,000 and 800,000 years old. So it's hard for us to imagine 20,000 years ago, but I think it's very likely that our heritage goes back even farther. That one was found, the other one, the older one was found in Israel. Next, please. So the goddess is still alive in modern times in some ways. This was a goddess of democracy that was created by the students at Tiananmen Square. And I love that they called her the goddess of democracy, not the statue of democracy, like we have the Statue of Liberty, but they recognized her as a goddess. And for me, I know so many of us are concerned about the goddess of democracy right now. And so for me, what I chose to do after the 2016 election, stopping signing so many petitions, was to choose one cause to honor the goddess of democracy, and that is fair elections. So I did some little, grunt work for transparency in campaign ads, and then more recently for transparency in voting. So I know we all have our different ways of honoring her. Next, please. This is Sedna from the Inuit people. And she is the most important deity for the Inuit, and the actually most prominent woman in Inuit culture is called Sedna. And I really resonate with her because of the work I felt really called to do starting with 2000 for the ocean. And Sedna is also really amazing because in the Inuit culture, if there's something off in the harvesting in the ocean, if there's not enough food, the shaman's job is to go on a shamanic journey to visit Sedna and ask her what the people need to do to bring things back into balance. He combs her hair and he receives the message from her that he then takes back to the people. And maybe it's something like, don't catch so many young fish, or you're over-harvesting in this area. And what would it be like if in our culture that is how we received our guidance as to how to make all of our decisions, particularly in the environment, as an example for her. Next, please. This is an ancestor mask representing the woman from the land of the dead, from the Gabon culture. And she has these 9 lozenges, which are perhaps, again, the 9 months of childbearing. I've seen how she comes forward is in a funeral ceremony, which can go on for 3 days, drumming and singing. A person on stilts comes in wearing this mask, representing the woman from the land of the dead, and the mourners get to interact with her. I've seen photographs of them throwing rocks at her, or this figure cradling one of the mourners. So again, imagine if we had ceremonies like this. These are the kinds of things we can learn from these cultures, from these images. Next, please. This is the snake priestess from 3,500 years ago in Minoan, Crete. This is my root culture. Some people have root gurus. I have a root culture. And this ring I've been wearing for 40 years is a copy of a Minoan seal ring. And it shows a woman, similar to this one, bare-breasted with the flounced skirt. And she's kneeling, and she has a dolphin on either side. And I love that this culture, that was their seal ring. It's not a sword and lions rampant. It's a woman with dolphins. I mean, imagine if that was what was guiding our culture. And it's telling that Minoan Crete was very sophisticated technologically and artistically, and it also lived in peace for 1,500 years. Even though they traded with Egypt and were very sophisticated with other cultures, they still lived in peace. Imagine, imagine, imagine just 50 years of peace. The United States, by contrast, in its history, has been at war or under threat of war for 98% of our history. Next, please. These yoni rocks are from Southern California, and the Kumeyaay people would use them for women's and girls' ceremonies, particularly the girls' coming-of-age ceremony. There are so many important things about coming-of-age ceremonies, both for women and for girls. Both for women and for men and for everyone, because I feel we can't be adults until we go through this rite of passage. The girl is considered in many Native American cultures to become the goddess, and then she blesses the people. There's this understanding of the human body as being sacred. And it reminds me of this wonderful myth from the people who lived in Mississippi, and where the goddesses challenged a human woman to who had the most beautiful pubic hair. And the woman meditated, and she called the hummingbird, and the hummingbird wove her breast feathers into the woman's pubic hair, and the woman won the contest. It's that kind of playfulness. I could go on and on. Next, please. Kanon with the Sword by many of our dear friend Mayumi Oda. And Mayumi says, Westerners have a misunderstanding of compassion. They think it means being nice. And being nice is important. And we also sometimes need a sword to cut through the bullshit. So I have given, she says, Kanon, who's the Japanese version of Kuan Yin, a sword to cut through. Next, please. And last, I'm closing with this Guanyin. Interestingly, she's 1,000 years old, right at the time when Guanyin, the Chinese goddess of compassion, was transitioning from being a male deity to a female deity. So you can see that androgynous nature in here. But to me, what's most important about her is she is centered inside herself. She has one foot on the ground, and she is ready to help whenever needed, but she's centered and grounded inside of herself. So I think this is a strong teaching for all of us today when we want so much to do whatever we can to help heal the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I had wanted, when we were designing the panel, to have Hallie start, because some of her images span so many continents and go back so far in time. And so we're going to go from the general, the worldly, to the particular. So, Vijay, and I know that you too will need slides.
Yes. Yeah.
And I want to ask the audience, are you able to see well with the three of us up here? Or okay, fine.
make sure the slides are. So this is the one that says Feeding 1,000 Souls with the red. Okay, while they're doing that. I'm just going to check my voice. Does the voice work? Okay, great.
Or closer to the mic.
Closer to the mic? Is that better? Okay, great. I'm so excited to be here with all of you, with each one of you. I know, louder? Louder. Wow. Oh, raise the mic. Okay, that's better. Is that better? Maybe? Yes. Okay, how about the people in the very back? Just raise your hand if it's working. Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, just want to make sure. This is really a partial celebration of this book that I've been working on really most of my life, I think. We don't even know, when we're starting a book, right? And I remember Arundhati Roy, years ago saying, when she did her first book, The God of Small Things, people would ask, how long did it take you? And she said, one level it's 5 years, at another level it was 36 years, as old as she was. And so I feel the same way, we could add up the number of days, weeks, or months, but really I'm 57 and I feel like it took me 57 years, and it's still a kind of treasure chest that unfolds for me. Like, even though the book has been published for a few months, there's many, many layers of meaning that just keep unfolding in front of me. So this is really dedicated to my mother, Amma, who's taught me and continues to teach me to practice unconditional love. It's for my children, Jaya and Uma, and also for all the Tamil women who have ever practiced the kolam for over 1,000 years, for all the Tamil women who are practicing the kolam now, and for all the Tamil women in the future who will be practicing the kolam, and for all of the Tamil women who taught me so much. Tamil is a language that's practiced and embodied by 50 to 70 million people in southern India, southeastern India, and, great, thank you. And it's right next to Kerala. If you know Bangalore, it's east and south of Bangalore. I was born in a small village called Yenangudi in Thanjavur district, along the Kaveri River. It's like the Mississippi River Valley equivalent. It's really the breadbasket of the whole South, the Kaveri River. And then I grew up in New Delhi and also Washington, D.C. area. So it was sort of bicultural. I always felt like I had two, like a bifocal lens to look at the world through. So when I was in India, I felt like I was an anthropologist in a way as a kid because I had my American eye, and then when I was here, I always had my Indian eye with me as well. So I was looking at America also as a cultural anthropologist. And sometimes it was betwixt and between, and sometimes you had deeper senses of belonging. So this, I just want to begin with a quote from a wonderful teacher of mine, A.K. Ramanujan. And if you don't know him, he was an incredible poet. And he wrote a book called The Interior Landscape. And he was one of the first translators of ancient Tamil poetics from the 3rd century BCE. So Tamil is the other classical language in India besides Sanskrit. And not many people know that. And this is what he says this is a quote from him. Even one's own tradition is not one's birthright. It has to be earned, repossessed. The old bards earned it by apprenticing themselves to the masters. One chooses and translates a part of one's past to make it present to oneself and maybe to others. One comes face to face with it, sometimes in faraway places, as I did. So Ramanujan actually discovered the ancient Tamil poems in the bowels of the University of Chicago Library when he was a professor there. He just happened to be wandering around and was like, what is this, Every day in southern India, millions of women wake up before dawn dreaming of drawing designs filled with their desires for the well-being of themselves, their communities, and the world. These designs, the kolams, which means beauty in Tamil, on the thresholds of homes, temples, and businesses are ephemeral. They are gone a few hours later. Rice dust on the feet of passers-by, blessing both the ritual drawers and those who see them. And the kolam is created by Tamil women in Tamil Nadu, the southeastern state in India, and wherever Tamils have migrated. Northern India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Singapore, Fiji, South Africa, England, the United States, and elsewhere. One of the things, and this is another quote from the book, women taught me that kolams are made to do something beautiful, to invite and welcome and host the goddess Lakshmi, who represents wealth, good luck, alertness, and wellness, to banish, unwelcome, and de-host the goddess Mudevi, who's the goddess of poverty, misery, bad luck, sickness, and laziness, which we all need to do at time to time, to catch the negative effects of the evil eye, jealousy, and envy of those who intend harm, both those you know and strangers, to embody Ganesha, the elephant god, the remover of obstacles, to indicate auspiciousness and well-being, or mangalam, to prevent suffering and death, to play, to compete with women amongst each other for the best design of the day, to show one's intimate love for God, to be like the 9th century girl-woman saint Andal, who's thought to be one of the first kolam makers, to remember and ask for forgiveness every single day for the earth goddess, Bhudevi, for our walking and stepping on her and burdening her with all of our actions, and to feed 1,000 souls, and so much more. So as a child, I watched my mother create kolam patterns wherever we lived. So whether it was in Yanangudi or Rettagudi, our ancestral village in South India, or Delhi in a government bureaucratic flat, government servant flat, or in a suburban Maryland home in Maryland. And, so I would wake up in the morning as a teenager on my way to high school or middle school, and my mother would be waking up at 4:30 in the morning in pitch black in the winter, and she would take her snow shovel, and I would hear the scrape of the snow shovel on the concrete as she cleared the path, and then had her half coconut shell filled with rice flour, and she would make the kolams. And so she was the one who cleared the path for everybody who came through that threshold during the day, either going out for us or anybody coming in. And as I was growing up, I would ask her, what does it mean? What does a kolam mean? And she would give me some rushed answer because she was always busy. And then I wouldn't be satisfied, and then she would say, well, maybe you'll find out when you're older. And we never asked so many questions. When the elders asked us to wake up at 2 in the morning and take a coconut oil bath, we would just do it. We never asked why. So you ask these strange questions, and I can only answer you up to a certain point, Chalo, just leave me, So she would just dismiss me, and then, it was like a seed of a question that kind of flamed in my head and my imagination. And then I met a wonderful philosopher named Ivan Illich, and he was working on a book, which I recommend highly, called H2O and the Waters of Forgetfulness. And it's a history of the perceptions of water as sacred in the West, and a history of sewage, and a history of toilets, history of smells, history of the body. It's almost like a pamphlet, but it's an amazing book. And he was working on a footnote on the kolam. So this was in 1984. And so he asks me over dinner one day. We're there with a group of people in LA, in Claremont, listening to his lectures for H2O that was going to become that book. And he says to me, do you know anything about the kolam? And I was like, the kolam? Oh, it's nothing. It's just something my mother did every morning. I'm very embarrassed to admit that, but it's really true. That's what and then I said, but I'll draw some for you in the morning, and then you can ask me any questions you want. And then, we didn't even go to breakfast because it was 3 hours of questions. He asked me about the construction of ritual space, and I had to say, I don't know, for 3 hours. So that really kind of, what blew my mind was that this was all in the oral tradition. That's what I discovered. There was really hardly anything written about it. And here were millions and millions of women that were doing this every morning. So my feminist eyes were really aroused. I was like, wait, what is going on here? There's nothing written about this. And, most women in Tamil Nadu do this every morning. And then my path sort of opened up, and I, started learning all the stuff that I needed to do in order to ask women the questions that I needed to ask. So the book is organized, like the first 3 chapters are kind of a frame story of how I got into this work, and the ethnography and the travels, and how it was for me to go, in a sense, located from here to there by myself, and traveling to villages by all over, and waking up at 4 a.m. and asking questions about what this means, and then what the kolam means. And then it's every chapter, like 7, 8, 9 chapters, each one is clustered around a concept of keywords that the women taught me. So it's around auspiciousness, around Andal, the saint, all the listings of reasons that I gave you in the beginning, those are all represent a chapter. And women were so open to talking with me. I just felt so grateful. They were very generous with me, and they often, even my research assistant wouldn't take any money for it, because she said, well, you're just getting your expenses paid, so as long as my expenses are paid, I'm fine. So she would also, so it's really been much in the gift economy. I felt like this book, and the kolam itself is part of the gift economy. Even if economy is the right word, it's a gift practice. It's an offering to the earth goddess to ask her for forgiveness. The other thing that was very important for me, there were so many unfoldings for me during this time. One of the things I realized was that the kolam provides us with a certain kind of grammar, kind of cultural grammar of rituals of generosity. That in a way, in our modern culture that has its roots in the early 1800s, even Thoreau could see through the beginning of the parentheses that we're in now, and that we have to figure out how to end this parentheses. He could hear, even in Walden, the train coming through, hearing the whistles of the train in the afternoon. And so, the kolam is really a recognition of that, our culture and modernity, in a way, it's spread out throughout the world, in a way is a grammar of rituals of selfishness and of greed. And, how to sort of make the I and the individual the preeminent focus. And the kolam is really about the other. The kolam is about, sharing. It's about how do you give to those who cannot give back to you. So one of the things that women talk to me constantly about, they said the real reason we do the kolam is to feed 1,000 souls. And so I will begin with the slideshow now, so I can weave that in. Oops. Yeah, there we go. So this is a celebration. This is the cover of the book. It's during this amazing festival that is called Pongal, which is a harvest festival, and it happens in the middle of January. And the whole month before, the month of Margari, is like a practice month for those 3 days of Pongal. So the whole Tamil Nadu is just, filled with huge designs during the mid-December and mid-January period. And it was very convenient for me, because that was when I had my winter semester break between my, graduate school semesters. So it was convenient time to go and see the kolam. This is my mom. This was the Smithsonian. So this was also a seed, when I was doing some, for the Festival of India in 1985. Go ahead. And this is one, you see also, it's not just one woman or one female, one girl making the kolam every morning. You also can make it in a community, and you can make it with a bunch of people. Usually it's done before dawn. Traditionally it was done before the first rays of sunlight hit the front threshold of the house. And so the idea was that you were also welcoming the sun in, and really, expressing gratitude that the sun rose another day and that you're present to witness that. But now, I noticed also, I started this work in the mid-'80s, and I noticed in '91, when India opened up to the West in terms of globalization, all of a sudden, CNN came in. It was but the difference between 90 and 91 was striking, because 91, in the villages I would go to, TV had come, CNN had come, so people were watching English movies and Hindi movies and till 2 a.m. So there was no way they could wake up at 4. So then it was 7. Yeah, it's okay if we do it after the sun. So the rituals change also with time. Go ahead. Next one. this is an exuberant one. I love this because it shows kind of the exuberance of the rice. The Harvest Festival is really a celebration of the harvest of rice. And the way you do it is you have a pot in front of your house and you say Pongalo Pongal, which means like the celebration of rice literally overflowing the pot and of abundance. And so in a way, to me, this kolam kind of represents the abundance of the household, like the pot with the rice. Go ahead, next. This you see an overview as well. Go ahead. And you see how women are making it. This is a close-up, and it's made with rice flour, made with the hand. There are tools you can make it with, like cookie cutter tools, so you can make instant kolams as well, which look more complicated than they were to make. But this one is, one of the interesting things is these dot kolams. I have a chapter on mathematics as well, and that took me a few summers to figure out. There's a whole slew of mathematicians and computer scientists who've been working on trying to understand this grammar of the dot kolams to figure out, like, how do you cross over? It's a grid of lines, a matrices of lines, like you might have like 11 dots in the center and then n minus 2 all the way to 1, so 11, 9, 7, etc. And you would have to figure out how to draw a line through all the dots with only crossing them over once. And so those are very complicated to learn, actually. They're not simple. So mathematicians have tried to struggle with the mathematical properties in them. And it's the only folklore, women's folklore in the world, as far as I know, that actually is contributing epistemologically to traditions of mathematics and computer science in the Western traditional system, which is really interesting that, again, this is an unwritten form, it's in the oral knowledge, and here it is, contributing. So, go ahead. So here you see some of the one of the dot columns as well. This is an amazing one. Women often said to me that making a kolam was like catching the folds of infinity, over time and space. That, the kolam is really all through time extending into infinity, but we're drawing the kolam to just show a small portion of it, Go ahead. This is also an architectural kolam where you see the folded down of an aerial view of a temple. So it's interesting that architecture is also embedded within the kolam. This is also part of the festival of Pongal. This is a competition, teenage girls competition. It's very intense, 3 hours, girls and women compete. You also see figurative kolam. So here's a calf and also color, which used to be organic and now it's artificial color. Here's a Swiss girl. Go ahead. It's a beautiful elephant design. So there's a grammar of designs on the forehead as well as on the front of the house. And this is feeding 1,000 souls of feeding crows. This is just a few. This is one of the most complicated ones. This is a wet rice flour. It lasts for months. Go ahead. And this is part of the mathematics. You can see the fractalization of the kolam. And this was the most beautiful kolam I saw in Mailadurai, the land of the dancing peacocks. Stunning 14-year-old kolam. It's like a weaving, really. Yeah, okay. So one of the things I wanted to just end with is that feeding 1,000 souls, women kept saying that to me. So what did that mean? And it took me a long time to figure that out. And that was another footnote. My life is made of footnotes, It was a footnote from the 3rd century. Dharma Shastra is an ancient Sanskrit text. And what it said was the following, that when a Hindu builds a house, that it's considered to be one of the gravest sins in the world. Why? Because you are evacuating species out of that space in order to build your own house. And it is believed that there is no way to make up for that sin, for that pabam. And so this feeding 1,000 souls, it's done with rice flour. And it's to feed those species that you evacuated from your house. And it's a little tiny way to make up for the huge evacuation that you did and the destruction. So it really it just became so intriguing to me that kind of cultural and religious sensitivity to place. And I feel like that's kind of what we need to recover for this present moment. Thank you.
I know that the audience will have questions, but I wanted to just ask one question each of our two authors. So Hallie, I wanted to say that, many of your images, not all of them, come from the ancient past, and some of them refer to indigenous traditions that have been eroded, by the pressure of patriarchy, by the forced adoption of Abrahamic religions, as well as by colonization, slavery, all of that. And what I wanted to ask is, why do you believe that these images are still relevant for modern people?
It's such a great question. Thank you. I think the short answer is we look at the condition of the world today and consider that, how did we get here? And how I think we got here is by the suppression of the feminine all over the world. And therefore, I know that we can get transmissions, we can get inspiration from this art, from these myths, and also from the practices, like the one that I talked about like the shaman journeying to Sedna, saying, what should we do? How should we be doing our fishing, which is their main form of nourishment. And so it's very, it's like messages from the past. That's how I feel. And as you said, some of them are from the present, or like the present that you're describing, that is going on. What can we do? How can we start to come back into balance? We're so out of balance, and we know that. And just as empowering girls and women is the primary wedge towards reversing climate crisis, I think that the way that we're going to make that happen is not just sending girls to school and giving women control over their bodies. It's remembering and reclaiming those qualities of partnership, of nurturance, of compassion, of being with, of the loving mother who loves all her children equally. Does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah. And Vijaya, I also, in your book, you talk about some of the differences between traditional geometric rice flower patterns and then some of the modern ones, which, as you saw, use references from, Hollywood movies, Bollywood movies, that are very different. And you write about being one of 3 judges at a contest where all the winners were those who were working with more picturative and not, say, the geometric patterns. And I wanted to ask you, what do you feel, do you feel that there is an erosion of the older patterns? And if so, what is being lost? And, what is being gained in this encounter with modernity?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think it's interesting. I don't know if the kolam always changed, over the last 1,000 years. I mean, I've only witnessed the last 35 or 45 years. So what I think is that, the loss of the reason for doing the kolam, the primary reason of feeding 1,000 souls, it's been kind of reduced in the gaze of modernity in a way as a worship of the goddess Lakshmi, who's the goddess of wealth. And so I think, and I think this is true of many traditions all around the world, is the modern, I want to say grammar in a way of living is so powerful, and it's so, it comes with so much energy, both military and, and telecommunications and all the media, legal structures, that it's very hard for traditional cultures to resist those temptations, and be kind of held asunder with them. So I think, for many of the generation of kolam makers my age, for example, they didn't do it with rice flour anymore. They did it with stone flour because it was cheaper, a little bit cheaper. But then that meant that you forgot that the reason you did it was to feed the ants and the birds and the earthworms that you had evacuated from your house, you know. And so I remember, you know, I mean, I hung out a lot with grandmothers, you know, during my years of research, and the grandmothers were like, they were just crying. They were like, what is going on here? And the whole abstract design of the dots had so many levels of meaning as well, you know, of their dots representing seeds. Many women said that it was like planting the rice, you know, in the rice fields. So there was a lot of symbolic trading and exchanging between the sort of actual physical life and the designs. And also that was also being lost as well. At the same token, you know, every caste had their own rivers of designs traditionally, and never shall the twain meet, right? And you could always identify the caste by the column at the threshold. You can no longer do that. So in a way, because people have gifted each other in a way, and shared the columns, you know, that's a fantastic thing. I think about modernity is that, you know, the whole horror of the caste system is in a way slowly being, at least in this column category, you know, being erased, you know, and not necessarily in outside life, but at least at the column level, you know, there's a recognition of feedback back and forth. So I think, and you know, for me, it was very complicated because I loved the old geometric designs. But I also had to, you know, kind of report on what was actually happening on the ground. And so it's, and the dot columns, as you can see, are much, much harder to do. And I think the modern sense of aesthetic has taken over. So that the figurative designs, you know, whether they're cartoon-like or they're just given more value, you know, in the culture. Like the geometric is too hard and it takes too long to learn, and you know, the figurative one, you just can practice the art. The other thing that's lost, I think, is that when you do the geometric, there's a sense of everybody is a good column maker, good enough column maker for the ritual purpose. So you have millions and millions of women who have this aesthetic tradition that's embedded in a ritual context, right? But then what happens with sort of the modern gaze is that the more and more figurative you get, there's an evaluation of beauty that comes from different areas, you know, that are looked at. And so then the traditional column doesn't look even beautiful anymore. And, you know, you see this in, you know, I mean, it gives me the chills to talk about it, but, you know, you see this in every aspect of life, right? The way that modernity gazes at tradition, or traditions, you know, the multiplicity of traditions. And I did the same thing with my own mother, you know, until I went to this conference on oral knowledge, you know, because she was not educated, you know, grew up in a village, she didn't speak English, she was deaf, you know, I thought she didn't know anything either. So I mean, because I'd gone to school, I was, you know, I knew English, I was her guide, you know, through the world. And so the world that she knew, the knowledge she knew, had no place in my world, right? And so this book is really a way for me to try to, like, this dialogue that I've had with myself and with my mother, you know, and all the women like her who we judge as inadequate just by the way that we see, by the way that we're taught to see. And I guess that's part of the, you know, the political purpose of this book, one of many, is to recognize the brilliance and the genius of oral knowledge, male or female, you know. So.
Thank you so much. And I think your response also touches on the question that I asked Hallie in terms of how these traditions are continuing and are not continuing, both and, in the modern world. So we have maybe about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. Yes, over here.
I'm gonna steal my mic.
Okay. Pretty used to using these things.
This is red right now.
Okay, thanks. Ooh, batteries in there.
Okay. So, working. As you were speaking, something came to mind, and this is a question for all three of you. My process since I was about 21 with the women's movement came through the women poets of the Twin Cities. And that was basically my quote-unquote consciousness-raising group. And I'm really interested in these aspects of meditation, of women sharing together, and the knowledge coming from inside to outside rather than knowledge being taught from an authority. And Vijaya, I did the review of your book, and I was so moved by the physical process that the women were doing, that it was kind of like a dance, and it was a ritual, and it was all involved with Lakshmi and this image, you know, and this group of images, you know, Bhudevi and Lakshmi and the whole pantheon, a worldview. So if each of you could reflect a little bit on what is feminine, or some learning in your life or a practice where you are getting knowledge from inside, which you feel is feminine, and if it has something to do with getting together with other women, because both for meditation and for poetry, it has been compounded by groups of women being together.
I want to say I totally appreciate the question, and if each of us answers that question to its fullness, there will be no other questions. So both wanting to honor the profundity that you're asking about. So can I ask us maybe to just say something brief that may lead us, so that if there are other questions.
So like 1 minute each? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Well, you make me think of the 70s and the 80s, which is when I was so, as I said, I was so excited to meet with other women, and I felt like that's how we were going to find out what had been lost, was just by listening inside of ourselves, because we weren't getting it in our educations, we weren't getting it in our religions, we weren't even getting it in our politics. Because when I started, the first class I taught was in 1974, and I called it Feminist Spirituality, Spiritual Feminism. I didn't know what else to call it. Nobody had ever done anything like that I knew of. And so it was like the consciousness-raising groups of listening from within, but it was also looking at the body, looking at dreams, looking at ritual, looking at natural healing, and then just finding out what we were finding out. And that became much more widespread. There's a whole younger generation of the 30-somethings that I know that are really into the moon. I mean, I've met different ones from different places. It's just so exciting to me. So that's the path. And I just want to say, my old friend Chelis Glendinning, she's my best bud when I lived here in Berkeley, she said, well, nobody really knows what the feminine is, but at least women maybe have a head start.
So beautiful question. Two things come to mind. I was really shaped by the feminist movement in the 70s as well, even though I was a teenager, just reading the Washington Post every day and running into ideas with Gloria Steinem and that whole company. It just, sort of woke me up to battles in the household, of whether I had the right to wear my hair out or wear blue jeans or dress, whatever. And so that was, and then taking a lot of women's studies classes as I was an engineering student at Maryland, again, really just woke me up. It was like a critique of the engineering that I was studying, from within the women's studies classes. The other thing that I think shaped me also was being deeply embedded in Hindu ritual life, which was very gendered, which I fought against as a feminist. But at the same time, I was embedded within the women's ritual lives. So, if my mom said to wake up and, garland the flowers at 4 a.m, I would do that, once a month or Fridays, or whatever ceremony she was organizing. So I guess both of those, shaped me. And I guess, for me, it's not, I haven't necessarily had like active women's circles. I've always wished for it, but didn't have the time. But for me, books have served that purpose. Books have been my, I don't know, just ribbons that have tied me with women's words and women's language and men's language too. Men who have helped me see what gender is about as well. They've been critical. So I think for me, it's been a dialogue, both in teaching, and just, trying to understand this weaving. It's not, and also trying to learn to meditate. And I've been meditating off and on since I was 12 or 13. So, but it's not like a specific, I can't point to one dot. There's many dots, as I'm sure for everyone. Thank you.
And I think the way that I want to speak to this is, at our program, we defined women's spirituality very inclusively. So we included traditions that were formal and formalized with priestesses, with ritual. We also defined it in terms of people, who didn't claim a particular tradition, who were mystics, who went out and found the voice of God or goddess in the wind or the rain. I like to say, having studied Wiccan and Yoruba traditions and other indigenous traditions, that I felt at some point that to affiliate with any one of those would be to dishonor other ancestors that I had. And I like to say that I'm of the tradition that, whether black women were allowed to preach in the church or not on U.S. soil, on this soil, Turtle Island, there were always those women who went out into the forest and came back with a song or chant or healing ritual or a plant that spoke to them. And that, for me, that kind of intuitive, open awareness and the meditative traditions, which include active practice like drumming or dancing, that include the body, that include a sexuality that is fully consensual and open and transcendent, that all those are ways that we know what we honor as the divine. How, and I like to say, spirit as we know and name it, he, she, it, they, them, because for any of us, it is all of them. And I think one last question. Oh, oh goodness, there, in the middle.
So, more than a question, it's a comment on, Hallie, the comment that you made earlier that from goddess you went to cleaning the ocean to garbage. And I'm an artist and I paint about goddesses as well. And I was involved in cleaning up a lake in Bangalore. I don't know if you know about the old airport in Bangalore. There was a Vibhutipura lake from 22 acres. It became 14 acres and it would become a garbage dump. So whatever. Yeah. And then I used to paint about even ecological issues. And I was asked every artist has their own signature and it's just so varied. What's your point? Mm-hmm. And that's when I stumbled upon something called ecofeminism. Mm-hmm. You guys heard of that? So that's something I wanted to bring up here.
Of course, yes. Thank you. Well, I have been given the 1 minute.
Yes. So to comment on ecofeminism, is that the question?
And what I think I would like to do is just acknowledge, just let's give a round of applause for our authors. Who I think will be outside signing books, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And there may be some room for questions. We're a small enough group so that might continue out there. Mm-hmm. So thank you for coming out so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience.